Hello everyone. I hope you all are safe and healthy. And don't worry about your studies because of the corona pandemic. We are here to take care of that. Today we are going to do Introduction to Legal Aptitude, and before we really start with the lecture, let's just go through all the examinations that you can take up to start your career in law. There are many which you can take. One, the much sought in or amongst the group is your CLAT, which is conducted by 22 national law universities. Next is your ILET, which is conducted by the National Law University of Delhi. Then you have LSAT, which is conducted by the Jindal Global Law School. Then you have MHCET, and then you have SLAT, which is conducted but obviously by the Symbiosis Law School. Now, when I talk about CLAT and rest of the examination in the group, CLAT has now a changed, new revised pattern as far as its paper pattern is concerned, as far as its number of questions are concerned, and the way they are going to be asked, and why are they asked in that particular pattern. Now, initially, before the changed pattern, CLAT used to have this principle-based question, now which is changed to reading comprehension-based question. Now, why is that done really? That is done particularly to assess a student or to assess the student's ability to comprehend a content, to assess the understanding of the student to comprehend a particular topic or a particular passage that is given to you in that particular paper, whereas the rest of the examination would have the similar pattern, that is your principle-based question. Now, what really happens in this principle-based question is, you would be given with a set of a particular principle, set of principles, and then you would be given some facts under it, which would be followed by 4 options. You have to read those facts, you have to understand the principle, you have to apply that principle to the set of facts and choose one of the most appropriate answer which is given to you in the following options. Now here, when I say appropriate option, you need not choose any ideal answer there. You are not supposed to choose the correct answer, but you have to choose appropriate answer, by which I mean you have to choose the option which fits the best in the given set of facts. Now we'll see how do we do that. We'll see how do you really stick to the principle, and then the remaining part of this particular pattern is your legal knowledge question. So now let's see in detail what does this particular section consists of in this pattern. It starts with, this particular section consists of 2 subsections. One is your legal reasoning section, wherein you will spot your principle-based question. Now, these principle-based questions, they will appear, you can spot them in 3 types. First one would be your single principle question. Second would be your multiple principle question. And third is your cluster principle question. Before we see this in detail, the second section is your legal knowledge section. Now, in this legal knowledge, again we have 3 types of question which you can spot. The first type of questions is based on your static GK. Second is your current affairs, and third are your assertion and reason question. Now, how does this really work? So the first is your single principle question. The single principle question is where you would be given with one principle, some set of facts and 4 options given below them. You have to read this particular principle, you have to read those facts, you have to understand what is given in those particular facts, you have to apply the given principle and choose an appropriate answer. Now one thing is, here you have only one principle to apply it to the given set of facts. Whereas when I talk about multiple principle question, there would be multiple principles given to you. You have to read all those principles and apply it to the given set of facts and choose an appropriate answer. Whereas the third is your cluster principle question, where you would have multiple principles for multiple questions or single principle for multiple questions. You have to read it accordingly and apply it accordingly to choose the appropriate answer. And the second part of this particular section is your legal knowledge, which in this particular section, again the questions can be spotted in 3 different types. First is your static GK. Now what do you really get in this particular type? You have your Latin terms, you have got your Latin maxims covered, you have the landmark cases. Moving on to your second type of question is your current affairs. Here you need to know questions like who's the law minister, what is the name of the current Chief Justice of India, and so on. Third are your assertion and reason based questions. Now here you have to have a pre-hand knowledge about a particular principle. You are not going to get any principle given here, but you need to know two statements would be given to you. One would be called as your assertion, second would be called as your reason. Now you have to read both the assertive statements given in front of you. You have to understand what the assertion is talking about, and you have to see whether the second statement which is given to you reasons out correctly to the first statement. But then now, how do we really do all this? Worried? Don't. Because we are going to cover all of it in the further sessions. We've got covered all of the terminologies, what I'm talking about. You would be well acquainted after all those sessions, what all concepts you need to know prior in hand. Moving on, now we're really going to see how to solve these principle-based questions. Now, there are no set rules, there are no set formula for it, but then there are some tips, some skills which I'm going to share with you today. Starting with first, whenever you solve a principle-based question, the first and the foremost thing that you need to do is read the principle which is given to you carefully. Now this is very important while solving a principle-based question. Why? Which is what we are going to see through an example. Now I'm going to write 2 principles here. Meanwhile, you can write it with me. And while you write, please try and spot the difference what I'm talking here. When any injury is caused to any person by any event which could not have foreseen and avoided on the part of the defendant, the defense of inevitable accident can be taken. That's my first principle. And I'm going to write the second principle now. When any injury is caused to any person by any event which occurs naturally, which could not have foreseen and avoided on the part of defendant. The defense of inevitable accident can be taken. Now I have two principles written in front of me here. What is the difference that you actually noticed? Nothing? Okay, let me show it to you. Now here, if you just read it blindly, you would not be able to spot the difference. But here, there is a small difference which says the event which occurs naturally. That means, in the first principle, there is no existence of natural sources. But in the second principle, there is existence of natural sources, which changes the application of the principle to the given set of facts. And that is why you have to read the principle very carefully. Words like may, shall, even the slightest and the smallest words can change the meaning of the particular principle that is given to you. Hence, whenever you read a principle, you read the principle very carefully so that you can fulfill and prove all the ingredients which are given in the particular principle. Which takes me to the second rule which you have to keep in your mind while you're solving the principle-based question, which is you have to prove and fulfill every ingredient that is given in the particular principle, which is also called as disintegration of the principle. How is it done? Let's say, so the second is fulfill or prove all the ingredients of the principle. Again, let's take an example. Now, whoever by deceiving any person induces the person so deceive to deliver any property commits the offense of cheating. On the face of it, what have I understood? That this particular principle talks about cheating. But what are all the ingredients that are mentioned here which I need to look for while I am applying this principle to the set of facts which would be given to me? Now here, let's just disintegrate this particular principle. The first thing which I can guess, which I can get out of this principle is deception. Is this, which means what? To make someone believe something that is not true. Okay? The second principle is, or the second ingredient of the principle is induces, which gives me inducement. What does this thing mean? Inducement means persuading or influencing someone to do something. Now, and the third ingredient is deliver a property. Now, why are we doing this? This makes it easier for us to understand what all we need to look forward to when we are applying the same principle to the set of facts. Whether the set of facts which is given in front of you involves deception, it involves inducement, and whether a property is made to be delivered by that person to someone. If the set of facts includes all these three ingredients, then you are good to go. You have to apply the principle and then you have to choose the appropriate answer which would be given to you. Okay, moving on. The next rule is, okay, my bad, not rule. The next tip would be that stick to the principle. Do not go beyond the principle, which is very, very important. You have to keep this thing in mind. Even if you forget the first two, don't. But still, even if you do, that's not a problem. Do not forget this particular rule which says stick to the principle and not go beyond the principle. Again, how do we do that? So we will again see it through a principle again. Now my principle is, if anyone publishes a statement which can tamper one's reputation, such person can cause the offense of defamation. Okay, that's your principle. So the principle talks what? If anyone publishes a statement which can tamper one's reputation, such person commits the offense of defamation. Now this is the principle what we have, which you have to apply to a set of facts. Now instead of writing the set of facts, I'm going to tell you a story in the form of the set of facts. You hear it properly and tell me whether it is defamation or whether it is not defamation. So here it goes. Now there was this person called Alok. He is a journalist. He, in his newspaper, published something about an MLA which said that this particular MLA, Somnath, he encourages police encounters. Okay, now he has also published this in his newspaper. Later on, post this publication, it was realized, it was known that this particular MLA, he has actually rewarded a lot of policemen for the encounters they have done. Now, considering this particular story, these set of facts, whether Alok has committed the offense of defamation or not. Now, let me tell you something more which would be taught to you, or which I would tell you. Beyond this principle, the original principle says what? If someone publishes a particular statement and if it is a true statement, that means whatever statement is allegedly or which is said to cause defamation to that particular person happens to be the true statement, then the person so publishing it would not be charged for the offense of defamation. Now, this is what actually the rules of defamation is. But here, does this principle talks anything about something like this, some rule like this? No. So sticking to the principle, even if the original principles does talk about the truthness or the trueness of that particular statement, which is causing the repute of the person to be damaged, because this principle does not say anything of it, we would be sticking to this principle and not going beyond the principle. So sticking to this principle here, has Alok published anything which is going to damage the reputation of the MLA Somnath? Yes, and that is why Alok would be responsible, would be held liable for the offense of defamation. And that is how we stick to the principle and not go beyond the principle. Okay, moving ahead, there are two more So this one was the third one. There are two more rules or maybe two more skills which you need to keep in your mind while you are solving the principle based question. Is one, do not fall for any emotional trap of the facts. Whatever the facts talk about, even if they are putting up a story, or even if it is putting up a story which requires a lot of sympathy, which requires a lot of empathy, you do not give it to that particular set of facts, because we are not here to give any sympathy or fall for any emotional trap. Sticking to the principle, whichever appropriate option you think is the correct answer, you would go with that particular answer. And the last one is, as I've already told and mentioned, choose the appropriate answer and not an ideal answer. Okay? This is about your principle based question. Moving on to your second section, that is your legal knowledge question. Your legal knowledge section, you can spot questions again in three types. One would be your static GK, second would be your current affairs, and third was your assertion based question. Now what you really need to know in legal knowledge is we're going to study some of the part of it. Now starting with it, we are first going to see the hierarchy of the courts that are there in this particular country. So starting with, we have three major courts. One is your Supreme Court, then we have High Courts, and then we have District Court. Supreme Court of India is also known as the apex court of the country. Now when I say apex court of the country, this particular court has power conferred upon to it to rule and to govern over all the territories, over all the regions of this particular country. And High Court, for every state you need to have, this particular country needs to have one High Court. It does not mean that a state can have only one state can have a High Court. Two or more states together can form a High Court. And then we have District Court. Now District Court ideally can be divided into two types. One is called as your District Court, another is called as your Sessions Court. Now district and session, it means one and the same. For every district, for every session, you need to have one civil court, which is also called as your district court, and one criminal court, which is also called as your sessions court. Now out of the three courts which can be called the subordinate court, can you call High Court as a subordinate court just because it is subordinate to Supreme Court? No, you cannot. That's absolutely wrong answer. High Court is the higher court of the state. Subordinate courts are all those courts from District Court. Also, you have different family courts. Then you have different, other than the district civil court and session courts, you have labor courts. And then you have municipal courts. All from district courts are called as your subordinate courts and not the High Court. Now how are these courts distinguished? They are distinguished, they are differentiated on the basis of the jurisdiction which is conferred upon them. Now how many types of jurisdiction do we really have? Now we have many types of jurisdiction. Sticking to or confining to the syllabus of this particular examination, I'm going to teach you 5 basic type of jurisdiction. One is called as your original jurisdiction. Now what do you mean by jurisdiction? Jurisdiction means the authority, the power, the limit which is given to a particular court within which it can perform, within which it can try the cases. Try the cases means adjudicate the cases. The judge can sit in the courtroom and can do the trial, can perform the cases, can give decisions on the cases. Now first is your original jurisdiction. What does this original jurisdiction means? This is the jurisdiction which is given to all type of courts, which and wherein the person who wants to go and file a case can go. Which is the court where the person can file a case at the first instance? Is it the district court? Is it the high court? Or is it the Supreme Court? Now what is suggested is you should go to district court first to file a case. Why is it so? Is because you have more options even if the case at the district court does not fall in your favor. But does it mean that you can file it only at the district court at the first instance? No. You can file it wherever you wish for, and that jurisdiction which is given to the court is called as original jurisdiction. Second is your territorial jurisdiction. What do you mean by territorial jurisdiction? Territorial jurisdiction is basically nothing but it is based on the territories. Now we have three different types of territories. One is your region, that means your land. Second is your water, and third is your air territory. Talking about the land, now Pune, if any particular offense, if any particular crime, if any particular wrong. Now why did I use two different words here? Because if anything is going to happen on which has a criminal outcome, it cannot be called as wrong. And if anything that has a civil outcome, it cannot be called as an offense. So if anything goes wrong which has a civil outcome, that is called as wrong in the language of law. And whenever if anything has a criminal outcome, it is called as a crime or an offense. So if any offense or if any crime or if any wrong happens on the land of Pune, you would be going to Pune District Court. If it happens in Mumbai, you would be going to Mumbai District Court, to Satara, and so on and so forth. You wouldn't be filing a case for an offense which is happening in Pune in the court of Kerala. Yeah, that's because the court there does not have the territorial jurisdiction for it. And that's exactly is called as your territorial jurisdiction, which is given to those courts which are established in those particular region, which is established in that particular territory. Third is called as your appellate jurisdiction. Now let's suppose you happen to file a case in Pune District Court and the case does not fall in your favor. Is that it? Is that the finality of that particular case? No. You do have an option to go and file an appeal. Now where would you go and file an appeal? Would you file an appeal in a district court of any other particular region or territory? No. An appeal is to be filed in a higher court. So if it's a district court, an appeal can be filed in high court. If in the high court also the case does not fall in your favor, again you have another opportunity to go and file an appeal in the Supreme Court. This particular jurisdiction to entertain an appeal, to decide upon an appeal, is given to the higher courts. That jurisdiction is called as your appellate jurisdiction. Is pecuniary jurisdiction and penal jurisdiction. Now what are these jurisdictions? Pecuniary jurisdiction is based on the valuation of the property, and penal jurisdiction is based on the quantum of punishment. Now you have to remember, pecuniary jurisdiction is given or conferred only upon the civil courts, whereas penal jurisdiction is only for the criminal courts. Why? Now pecuniary jurisdiction, which is based on the valuation of a property, means, let's suppose there is a suit and the suit is about a disputed property between two parties. That particular property values up to 50 lakhs. Now based on the valuation of a property, each judge, now the judge is also ranked differently. Let's say there is a judge who is ranked as CJJD, that is Civil Judge Junior Division, and CJSD, which means Civil Judge Senior Division. Now this particular judge is going to get to try a case, let's say for the valuation of the case up to 50 lakhs. And this particular judge would be conferred the power to try a case above, or cases which would value above 50 lakhs. Now, if particular case values up to the 50 lakhs, that particular case would go to this particular judge under the pecuniary jurisdiction which is given to him, whereas the penal jurisdiction is given only to criminal courts, because this jurisdiction is based on the quantum of punishment. What do you mean by quantum of punishment? Quantum of punishment means the period, the total period of punishment of imprisonment which can be given to the accused. Now this is definitely to be decided at the end of the case. Then how do we really decide the jurisdiction even before the case has started? Now even if the case is going to be, or the punishment is, or the quantum is going to be decided at the end of the case, but definitely the accused would be accused of a particular crime before the case has started. Let's suppose X is accused for murder. Now in the Indian Penal Code, this particular offense is already been given with 14 years of imprisonment. Now, understanding the gravity and the circumstances of the case, whether the judge awards this particular, or whether the judge sentences this particular X with 14 years of imprisonment, depends on the finality of the case. But we do know that the quantum of punishment here is 14 years, and which is going to decide which court. For example, as we have Civil Judge Junior Division, Civil Judge Senior Division for civil courts, we also have JMFC and JMSC. These are again some types of ranks that are given to the judges. This again is called as Judicial Magistrate First Class. This is called as Judicial Magistrate Second Class. Now Judicial Magistrate Second Class can try all cases but which has a quantum of punishment up to 3 years. Beyond this 3 years, this particular judge does not have the jurisdiction to try that case. Whereas JMFC can try all the cases, which includes all types of quantum of punishment. He or she can also give a death sentence to the accused. Whereas this particular death sentence, or any death sentence which would be sentenced to an accused, has to be confirmed with the High Court. Now even if the imprisonment or the quantum of the imprisonment is decided at the end of the case, at the finality of the case, we prior in hand would through IPC know as to what is the extent of imprisonment that can be sentenced to that particular accused, and this perhaps becomes the basis of deciding the penal jurisdiction to be given to the individual judges who could be or who would be trying that particular case. The last one, we have one more, which is called as writ jurisdiction, and which would be discussed in detail in the upcoming sessions. Moving on, as we have different type of jurisdictions, we have different hierarchy of courts, we do have different types of laws which are to be interpreted by the judges in the court. Now when we have different types of law, we do have the hierarchy of law also. Starting with the first law, which ranks the highest in the hierarchy, is called as your constitutional law, which is also above all laws. all the laws and every authority in our country derives its authority from this particular law, and that is why it ranks highest in the hierarchy. After it are called as your statutory laws, which ranks second or subordinate to the constitutional law. Below it are your delegated legislations. And something that ranks the lowest in this hierarchy are your judge-made laws. Before we move to what are these judge-made laws, let us try and understand what are these statutory laws. As we all know, we have constitutional law, that means we have Indian constitution or Constitution of India, which gives authority to almost all the bodies, to almost all the authorities, to almost all the people that exist on in this particular country, on this particular land. And as we all know, Parliament or the legislature is one who legislates. By legislate I means who make laws, and these laws which are given to us in the form of different statutes, different acts, different legislation, the laws, the provisions, the rules which are given through those acts, through those statutes, through those legislations are called as your statutory laws. For example, I can say Contract Act. Now this particular act is passed by the legislation. This particular act, this particular legislation provides or gives a right to a person who is above 18 to enter into a contract. Now this particular provision is given through this law, which is called as a statutory law, because it is passed by the legislation, and this power to legislate is given to the Parliament by the Constitution. That is why it is said that all the statutory laws or all the laws will derive its origin from the Indian Constitution. Moving ahead, what are these delegated legislations? Now for this we need to understand what is the meaning of delegated, what is the meaning of delegations. Now legislature or the Parliament, it certainly makes laws, it certainly legislates, but sometimes the legislators, they will outline the law, they will contour the law. Girls would perhaps understand it better what is contouring. Yeah, that means they are going to outline the law, they are going to form the basis of the law. Now let's suppose that today I tell you using this particular marker is illegal. Now can I just say that much? What happens if I use this particular marker? What is the outcome of it? What and how and in which way will I be punished? This law needs to be complete in all its sense. Now when the Parliament is only giving you a basis, certain powers will be delegated. Delegated means given for time being to a part of executive. Those executives filling the complete law or completing the law, that particular legislation is called as delegated legislation, because some of the authorities who were delegated with the power to make these legislations have made that particular law. Moving ahead, what are judge-made laws? Now we all know we have three organs, that is your legislature, your executive and your judiciary. Each one of these particular organs, they have been given with their particular functions, and they cannot be interfering with each other functions. For that we also have the concept of checks and balances. But now as legislature has its own function to make laws, it can certainly delegate some power to the executive. Similarly, a judiciary has the function to interpret the law. Not necessary. Now let's say a judge gets certain case in front of him to try a case of murder. Now murder precisely has been defined in the IPC under section 302. Not necessary, if you don't know, don't really worry about that. But let's say this particular section is explained. It is explained, it is defined as if any person inflicts or gives someone with such a bodily injury which results into death is called as murder. Now it is defined so simply or in such a simple way. Not necessary that a person would commit murder in such simple way. It might be in much more brutal manner. It might be in much more worse manner. if the judge has to apply a particular section, if the judge has to interpret a particular section, the judge might feel that this section, this proviso is not enough for that particular case. During that particular thing, what a judge is been conferred with a power is, suppose this is a page of the judgment which the judge is writing. Whatever observation or whatever points the judge finds necessary to be made to that particular section, he is going to note those points at the corner of that particular page. Now these points will be added to that particular section and the mended section will be applied to the particular case. Now these points which the judge has made, these observations which the judge has made is called as obiter dicta, and the singular of this is obiter dictum. Applying this particular changes, applying these particular observation, the judge has for the time being mended the law. And why has he done that? To apply that particular law which is necessarily to be mended to apply to that particular case, applies to this case, passes this particular judgment. Now let's suppose that this is not the first time that any particular judge is getting any such type of case forth him. Maybe some another judge at some another court also gets the similar kind of case. What can the judge do? Is the judge supposed to go through the same procedure again? No. In such cases, what the judge is going to do is, this particular judgment, this particular law which is made by the judge for that particular case can be applied to the second similar case by the another judge. And why is this process called as doctrine of precedent? Is because this judgment, this decision which is applied by another judge in another similar case is called as precedent. And the application of this precedent to another similar case can be done because of the availability of doctrine of precedent. Now, doctrine of precedent gives two types of powers to the courts. One is the binding power and one is called as your persuasive power. What do I mean by binding power and persuasive power is, so let's suppose if the judge of a district court passes one particular judgment by making a judge-made law, it would not have a binding power or binding authority over another court, but it would have a persuasive value, that means influential value to the similar level court. But if any judgment, if any precedent is set by a higher court, then it would have a binding power, binding authority on the lower court than itself. Now, moving ahead with the hierarchy of laws, we also have, or these laws can be broadly classified into three categories. One we've already studied, that is called as your constitutional laws. Second, also we have studied, which is called as your statutory laws. And the third one are called as your procedural laws. Now we have two types of procedural laws. One is called as your Code of Civil Procedure and the other one is called as Code of Criminal Procedure. Now we have various substantial laws which gives us rights and which gives us provisions as with respect to deciding cases on civil matters and criminal matters. Those would be your statutory laws. But then if a particular person is arrested for a wrong or an offense, who is supposed to arrest that person? Who can try that person? Which court that particular person can be taken to? For how many days should he be put up for a judicial judicial custody or a magistrate custody or a police custody, all these things are to be done in accordance with the procedure established by the law. And where is this particular procedure given in? Where is this particular procedure given by or spotted at? So for all the civil matters, the procedure that is to be undertaken would be given in your Civil Procedure Code, and for all the criminal cases, the procedure that is to be undertaken should be followed in accordance with the Code of Criminal Procedure. So the differentiation of criminal and civil cases depends upon the procedural requirement. Moving ahead, as we have different types of law, we have different types of courts. We also have certain principles which are to be adhered to by the presiding judge of a particular court. Those principles are called as principles of natural justice. Every judge, every presiding judge of every court is expected to and is bound to adhere to these principles of natural justice. First is called as your Audi. Don't be so happy. It's Audi Alteram Partem. And second one is Namo Judex Sua Causa. I suppose you've understood everything. Shall I move ahead? Okay. So first one is Audi Alteram Partem, which means no party shall be condemned unheard. What does this mean? Now suppose I'm a judge of a particular court and I get two parties or a case wherein I have two parties in front of me and I have to try that particular case. Out of the two parties, I know one particular party personally and I am aware about that person's family, I am aware about that person's background and everything about it. So it is very obvious for me to be a little biased towards that person. So I happen to say that this particular case, this particular party is not supposed to perform its functions, its duties, and I am going to pass a ex parte order, or I am going to give a decision on the basis of what only one party says. Do I have that right? Have I been conferred with a power to do this? No, I cannot do it, because every judge is supposed to follow this particular principle, which says that the judge or the court is supposed to give is supposed to give freedom to every party involved in particular case to represent itself, to be heard by the court. So the person cannot be condemned unheard means the judge cannot try a case. The judge cannot pass an order on the basis of hearing or listening to only one party. And the second one is Namo Judex Sua Causa, which means no judge can be a judge in his own case. Which means, as I have already mentioned, if I am already biased towards a particular party, then the justice is going to be impaired. Then the justice which is supposed to be rendered will not be rendered, and that is going to go beyond the principles which are expected by a court, by a judge, or by the judicial system. That is why a judge cannot be a judge cannot judge a particular case in which the person has any, or in which the judge has any opportunity to be or to be biased towards a particular party. Moving ahead, not only the court, not only the judge, the parties involved also have certain rules, also have certain duties which the party has to perform. And if the party does not perform those duties, then the involved party would be causing contempt of court, What do I mean by contempt of court? Contempt of court, first of all, can be of two types. It can be a civil contempt of court. It can also be a criminal contempt of court. What do I mean by civil contempt of court? So a party involves disobeys the judge or does not adhere to the rules of the court. That particular disobedience, that particular not following the rules of the court amounts to the civil contempt of court. Whereas putting down the judge, what do I mean by this? That means if you are in any way trying to defame the judge, that would amount to the criminal contempt of court. In both the cases, only Supreme Court is allowed to try the cases of contempt of court, and a punishment or an imprisonment of 6 months is given to every party who commits this particular offense. Apart from this, what you need to know for your static GK is the law of limitation. Now, as soon as I read something that is called as limitation, I understand, or we all understand, that it is going to put a restriction, it is going to put a limitation over something. Exactly, this particular law, this particular legislation puts a limitation or gives a restriction of time to file a particular or for a remedy in a particular case. Now, for I say this particular legislation is applicable only to civil laws. Law of limitation does not apply, it's not applicable over criminal laws. For contract laws, the period for which you can get the remedy, the period for which you can be awarded with a remedy for any of your right that has been infringed by anyone is 3 years. And for torts, for any tort committed, and if any person files a suit for any tort committed against him, for any right that has been infringed of that person, the period to get that remedy is 2 to 3 years. Now, when I say it bars the remedy, it absolutely does not bar your right to file the suit. You can definitely file the suit. Suit means a case in the court. So you cannot, it does not bar your right to file the suit, but it does bar your remedy to that particular right. Also, to get into a contract, to enter into a contract, to pay a time barred debt is completely valid. It is not invalid in any sense. Okay. So this was about courts, hierarchy of courts, laws, principles that are supposed to be followed by the judge. But apart from this, let's discuss one more thing, which is related to the parties who approaches the court. So as we've already seen that the cases differ as dependent on the outcome of the cases, and the two types of cases that we have is one is civil case and one is criminal case. Now, if a person has a civil grievance, what do I mean by grievance is when a person's right is infringed, when a person's right is violated, that violation or that infringement in legal terminology is called as grievance. So if a person has a civil grievance, that particular person would be approaching a civil court, and accordingly, whichever court the party having grievance or an aggrieved party approaches to would be named differently. So a person approaching a civil court for a civil matter would file a document which is going to state all of his or her grievances, and that particular document which is to be filed with the court is called as plaint. And similarly, the person filing this plaint is called as plaintiff. Now, the person who's filing the plaint is called as plaintiff, and such person would be filing the plaint against the person who has infringed his right. The court is also going to give an equal opportunity to the person who has been accused or who has been alleged to have given grievance to that particular party, and the court will avail him, the court would give him with an opportunity to respond to all the alleged crimes or to alleged offences which he has been accused of. And that is why that particular person under civil court in civil matters is called as respondent. Now let's suppose this is person X who is filing a plaint against person Y. So here X becomes a plaintiff and Y becomes respondent. Let's say this particular procedure is happening in district court. And in this particular court, the case runs in favor of X. But does that really mean that Y would be for life held responsible for the particular charge he has been held up for? No. Y here also has an opportunity under appellate jurisdiction, which we have done already, to file an appeal with the higher court. Now, Y would go to a higher court to file an appeal. And that in the similar fashion, Y becomes the appellant here. So not necessary that the person who is plaintiff will always remain the plaintiff and the person who is a respondent at the first scenario would always remain the respondent. Here, because Y appeals to the higher court, he becomes the appellant, and similarly now plaintiff would be asked to respond to the side of the story which Y has put up in the high court. And in the similar fashion, now the plaintiff earlier becomes the respondent. Now similar thing can be done to the higher court, whichever party appeals. Whereas, are they called the same parties on the criminal side in the criminal matters? No, they are named differently when they go to criminal court. Here, now, before we move to this, in civil matters, what is the first thing that we do is, we go to the police station. Even before going to the court, we go to the police station and we file a complaint. So the thing that is to be filed with the police station is called as complaint, and the thing which is to be filed with the court is called as plaint. Whereas on the other hand, when any offense, any crime is committed, the first thing that we do is we file an FIR with the police station. So the document which is to be filed with the police in the police station is called as an FIR. But the document which is to be filed in the court under criminal law, in the criminal courts, in the criminal cases is called as complaint. And because of which the person filing this becomes the complainant. Now there is another name for this person. This can also be called as prosecution. Now in criminal cases, we are not given with an opportunity to respond because we've been accused for a crime. And what is the reaction, what a person does or what is expected is to defend to a crime. And because of which the person here becomes the defendant. The procedure is same when the person goes to a higher court. Suppose this is done in sessions court and the case is dismissed in the favor of defendant. Does that mean that the prosecution or the complainant has no remedy? Does that mean that the crime which he is alleging to the defendant committing has been proved against him? No, he can go to the higher court, and now when he goes to the higher court, this person becomes the appellant, and similarly this person becomes the defendant, which goes in the similar fashion when you go to a higher court than this. Okay, that was it about the pattern which you can spot in the remaining examination other than CLAT. But then with respect to CLAT, this is not, or these are not the type of questions which you can spot there or which you are going to be asked in that particular examination. As far as CLAT is concerned, we do not have principle based questions or legal knowledge questions anymore. What we have now on that side is called as reading or questions based on reading comprehension. Now the pattern or the way you solve those questions is entirely different than what you have to apply in this particular pattern. When we solve the sheet, we would definitely be we would definitely get to know as how to solve those questions. But before we solve, whenever you read a comprehension or whenever you read a passage, it's the similar thing what we've been doing since our elementary school. It is nothing new. But when you solve those type of questions, there are some basic things which you need to keep in your mind. Is first, you have to read, and you have to read fast. You cannot be slow there, because you have to solve the entire paper in some constrained time, that is 120 minutes. You cannot be taking lifetime to read nicely. We cannot have our own gala time there, but we should be reading in the constrained time, in the confined time. Also, simultaneously when you are reading, you also need to comprehend what you are reading. You also need to understand what you are reading. Simply blindly reading is not going to work out there. So what do we really do? Also, when you comprehend, please keep it in mind that you do not apply your interpretative skills, or you do not understand that particular thing according to your understanding. What you need to understand is what the author is trying to tell you, what the author wants you to understand, what the author desires you to understand. And when you exactly understand that, you can solve all the questions which would be given under those particular passages there. Okay, that's about knowing the patterns, introduction to LA, and knowing different patterns of different examination. Moving ahead, I suppose the sheets have already been emailed to you. I would require you to pick up your sheet for LA, that is sheet number is 01. You can go through that sheet. Now, during this sheet, whatever I've discussed, we would be practicing that. We would try to apply that particular knowledge there, and then we can see whether how much have we understood, what all doubts do we have. In case you have any doubts, you can definitely write it to us. You can put it into your groups, and we would be replying to all those doubts. So your sheet is divided into two parts. One, the first 15 questions are based on your legal knowledge questions, and rest of them, the sheet, you have 4 passages which are according to the CLAT pattern. We would be quickly solving the first 15 questions, and then we would be discussing the strategy or how you should be solving the passages, and rest of them can be done as a homework. Okay, quickly going through the first 15 questions. The first question reads, the party that approaches the court with a case in civil matters is called, we just did it, and the correct option is C, that is called as plaintiff. Second question, the most observable distinction between civil and criminal cases is, so I have degree of punishment, procedural requirements, extent of fine, time taken in resolution. Now, when we were discussing the obvious distinction between the criminal and civil cases, I have already mentioned that the distinction which makes or which differentiates both the cases is the procedural requirement. Remember, we had a civil procedure code and a criminal procedure code. So the correct option here should be option B, that is procedural requirements. Okay, moving on to the third question. The third question is match the following, which in the first column it tells us about the appeals or the documents or the remedies or the rights which are given to the parties in case of the finality of the decision, and on the second column which court you can actually file that particular document to is given. We have to understand where can you file a reference petition, where can you file a review petition, and where can you file an appeal petition. Now, reference means when you are putting up a reference of a judgment, when you are trying to remember we did the doctrine of precedent. So if a judge is trying a case, if the attorney is fighting a case for his or his particular client, the reference of which cases can be given to that particular court, the correct answer to it is High Court, because of the similar court if that particular attorney wishes to put, then it would have a persuasive value, it would not have a binding value. So the correct answer for a reference would be High Court. The second is review. Now what do you mean by review? Whenever a decision is given by the court, by the judge, probably the contesting parties would want a review of the decision which is given by the court. In which कोर्ट कैन द पार्टी पुट अप अ रिव्यू पिटिशन? अब हाई कोर्ट में अगर एक डिसीजन हुआ है तो उसका रिव्यू पिटिशन आप डिस्ट्रिक्ट कोर्ट में नहीं डाल सकते हो. जिस कोर्ट में फाइनल डिसीजन दिया है, जिस कोर्ट में डिसीजन दिया है, उस जजमेंट का रिव्यू उस ही कोर्ट में हो सकता है. सो द करेक्ट आंसर फॉर द रिव्यू पिटिशन इज टू बी फाइल्ड इन द सेम कोर्ट which has passed that particular decision. And the third is appeal. By the very name we understand that it's an appeal which is to be done to the higher court. So if a judgment, if a decision is given by a lower court, an appeal is to be made to a higher court for review, for reconsidering that particular case, for reconsidering that particular decision. So the correct answer here is higher court. Going by that, the correct option here which gives me the correct answer is option C. So the correct option for question number 3 is C. Moving ahead, which of the following high courts was not established via letters patent issued by the British monarch? Now, when we were discussing hierarchy of court, I've mentioned that the high court, every state has to have a high court, or two or more states can together form a high court. Now, which were the first 3 high courts formed by the British monarch? So the first high court that India ever witnessed was the Madras High Court, second was the Calcutta, and third was the Bombay High Court. And this was particularly done by a patent letters which was passed by the British monarch. Now I have 4 options here, and the question is, which of the following high courts was not established via letters patent issued by British monarch? As I have already told you, the first 3 courts to be established through this particular letter were Bombay, Madras and Calcutta, which gives me D as the correct answer, because Delhi High Court was established and formed much later to these 3 particular courts. So the correct answer for the question number 4 is D. Moving ahead, question number 5 says, among criminal courts, the jurisdiction is usually decided on the basis of. Now, when I talk about civil sides, the jurisdiction that decides the cases is a pecuniary jurisdiction, whereas towards criminal courts, which jurisdiction is usually decided on the basis of is punishment. So the correct answer for which is the penal punishment, remember we did, it is based on the quantum of the punishment. So the correct answer for 5th here would be C, that is punishment. Moving ahead, question number 6 reads as, all sentences of death are subject to a confirmation by which court? We've already discussed this, and the correct answer for this is High Court. Question number 7 talks, consider the following statements. Now there are 2 statements given to you. We have to understand which of the 2 statements are correct. So the first statement is, a judgment of Madras High Court will not bind Allahabad High Court but have a persuasive value. As per the doctrine of precedence, subordinate courts are bound to follow the judgment of higher courts. Now both the statements are correct here. Why? Because Madras High Court will not bind Allahabad High Court because both of them are High Court. Similarly, they would have an influential value or influensive value. They would have a persuasive value because they are on the same level in the hierarchy. Whereas if it would have been a district court, then it would have a binding authority on the lower court. And the second statement says, as per the doctrine of precedence, subordinate courts are bound to follow the judgment of higher courts, which is of course obviously correct, and that is why the correct option here is A, which says both 1 and 2 are correct. Moving ahead, question number 8 is again considering the following statement and answering which of the statements are correct. So the first option says period of limitation in civil suits and criminal cases is mentioned in Limitation Act. As I've already told you, Limitation Act does not apply. It is not applicable to criminal cases or on criminal courts. So the first option here itself is eliminated. Let's move to the second one. Limitation bars the remedy but does not extinguish the right. We already know it. It's absolutely correct. So the second one is correct. The third one is a contract to pay a time-barred debt is invalid. While explaining the law of limitation, the last point which I mentioned is you can definitely enter into a contract to pay a time-barred debt. So here it is absolutely incorrect. So the correct option here is only second one is correct. Which of the following statements mentioned above is correct? The correct option here is B, which says only second one. Moving on, your question number 9 talks about principles of natural justice. Let's read it. Which of the following statements about the principle of natural justice is or are incorrect? Now here we have to understand which are incorrect. Prior to this, we tried to analyze which of the statements were correct. Now we have to analyze which of the given statements are incorrect. The first statement says all the concerned parties should be given an opportunity to present their case orally. We never, or I never mentioned this. There is no such rule that you can present your case only orally. You can also submit certain documents which would be beneficial for your case. And second is all the concerned parties have a right to have fair hearing, which is absolutely the first principles of natural justice, that is Obi Altram Partem. So the first statement between the two is incorrect. Remember, we have to analyze which is incorrect and not the correct statement. Your students often get confused here. You would just go with choosing which is the correct option, but paying more attention here, we have to choose which is the incorrect one, and the incorrect out of the two is the first one. Let's see which is the option which gives us that answer. That's option C. So the correct answer for the question number 9 is option C. Okay, moving on to question number 10. Consider the following states about contempt of court. Now you have to read the statements given and you have to consider which of the following states would result into contempt of court, or which of the statement talks about contempt of court in correctness. The first statement is only Supreme Court of India has authority to issue notice for and penalize for contempt of court. Second statement, contempt of court can be civil as well as criminal offence under the Contempt of Court Act 1971. A person found guilty of either category of contempt of court can be sentenced to 6 months of imprisonment. So the first statement here, it does talk about the Supreme Court's authority, but it is not correct in its entirety. Whereas the second statement does talk about contempt of court. It classifies the types of contempt of court. It also talks about the quantum of the imprisonment which would be given to the person who would be found guilty for the offence. So the correct answer here which talks about, or the correct state which talks about contempt of court is the option 2. And let's see which is the option that gives us the answer. That is option D. So the correct option for the question number 10 is option D. We have 15 questions in total, and with the discussed details about legal knowledge. I suppose you would be able to solve all the remaining 5 questions. In case you are not able to solve, in case you have any doubts regarding these remaining 5 questions, you can definitely get back to us. You can put it in your groups and we would be replying to you there. Moving ahead, this was questions on your legal knowledge. This was precisely on the patterns which would be there in all the other examination other than CLAT. But now your remaining sheets has all those questions, has passages which are based on the pattern of the CLAT examination, CLAT law entrance examination, which appears in its legal section. This entire sheet has 4 passages. We would be doing passage 1, wherein I would be telling you how to solve that particular passage, how you should have read that passage, what all points should have been concentrated more upon, and why should they be focused more upon. You can pause this video, you can take 2 minutes, read the passage, and then we'll resume. Okay, I suppose all of you have gone through the passage. Now all of you know what the passage talks about, what the author is trying to tell you. Just to give you an overview, this particular passage talks about the recent issue which was in talk, which is your Sabrimala issue, and the ban which was put up on the women entering the temple, especially the women who are menstruating from entering the temple. Now the entire passage talks about this particular thing, but it is classified, categorized point by point in all the 4 paragraphs which the passage consists of. Now when you read this particular para 1, what you should have, or what I think you should have focused more on, which would avail you to answer the questions given below, was the first para gives an introduction about the 2 women and how they were avoiding all those protesters and they were trying to enter the temple even after the ban. Second, para 1 also talks about the Supreme Court ruling which lifted up the ban which was put up on that particular temple. Whereas second paragraph here more and further talks about how and why were the women restricted, how and why were the women not permitted to enter that particular temple. It also gives one important line wherein the para says, the supporters of this ban argue that this respects the wishes of the deity enshrined there, Lord Ayyappa, who took an oath of celibacy. Now when you solve these questions, you would understand why this particular line is important for you to focus upon. The third, fourth paragraph, the entire passage, the author, when the author is trying to tell something through this passage, he definitely impliedly supports the ban, lifting up the ban by the Supreme Court through its ruling, but more critically, more crucially, the author is doing so in para 3 and para 4. How do I support what I am saying is the author in its last line, in the last para, says that yet the Supreme Court gave politicians an opportunity to advance much needed social reform. With this line, particularly with this line, what I can understand the author is trying to do here is, it not only impliedly supports the lifting up the ban, but it also says and affirms that this particular ban being lifted up is a much needed social reform. This was an overview about the passage which is given to you. So while you read a particular passage, while you try to comprehend a particular passage, there would be certain lines, there would be certain points which would be given in each para, how much ever paragraphs that the particular passage consists of. You have to identify. That definitely will come with practice, but you have to have an eye to underline, you have to have an eye to point out those critical lines lines which you think, according to your understanding, can give you the answers for the questions given below. Now that we've understood what the passage talks about, what the author is trying to tell us, let's try and answer the questions which are asked based upon this particular passage. Your first question, it asks, what are the reasons as per the author? Now here, when I told you what you require or what you need to have while you're solving a comprehension based question is, it's directly asked here. You need not put up your interpretative skills. We very often, we try to relate to the particular script or the particular content that we are reading. But here we have to constrain ourselves. We have to confine ourselves. We cannot be, getting emotionally attached to any particular content given, whereas we have to restrict ourselves to the point of what author is trying to tell us. We have to only understand what the author wants us to understand and not go beyond it, because we would be asked only what according to the author is. So the first question is, what are the reasons as per the author which stopped women of menstruating age from entering the temples? Now here, as I told you, we have 4 options. Let's just first go through the 4 options we have. A as an option says, women are quite fragile and may not be able to climb temples located on mountains like the Sabrimala temple of Kerala. Now this particular information is absolutely not related to the passage. We could not spot it anywhere in that particular passage. So this option being the correct one is completely eliminated. It goes completely out of question. Let's move to the option B. Women themselves never wanted to go to the temple. During ancient and medieval times, they were primarily responsible for household chores. Again, absolutely alien information. This is nowhere mentioned in the passage. So it is just to divert you. It is just to take you a little away from whatever information is given. But we are smart. We are not going to do that. So moving ahead to the next option, patriarchy and age-old beliefs which developed into our culture and got enforced in the Hindu society. Now, does this thing relates somewhere to the passage? Do you think that something like this directly or indirectly was given anywhere in any para in the passage? I think it did. But let's move on to the 4th option and see whether it was more related to the passage. Option D says there was a central law which prohibited any women from entering temple in India. Now again, as option A and B, option D also is nowhere in any indirect or direct sense mentioned in any of the paras. Going back to your option C, which talks about patriarchy and old age beliefs which developed into culture and got enforced in Hindu society. Certainly this particular language is nowhere used, but has something or is something related on this line was mentioned anywhere in the passage? Yes, as I told you in para 2, where it was said that supporters, para 2 line 4, you can read, supporters of this ban argue that this respects the wishes of the deity enshrined therein. Definitely this is an old belief, and if we move slightly towards para 3 of it, 3rd line says, men are most often those who decree the acceptable boundaries of belief and practice. So here, with the 2 paras, with the information which is given in both the paragraphs, I can deduce, I can derive to this particular information that yes, patriarchy, because men are most often those who decree the acceptable boundaries, and also there was a particular belief of the supporters who were supporting this ban. So patriarchy and old age beliefs which developed into our culture and got enforced in Hindu society, certainly they banned the women of menstruating age to enter the temples. So the correct option, according to the information which I have with me, which is given by the author through the passage, would be C. The correct option for question number 16 is C. Excuse me. Moving ahead. Your question number 17 says, what can be most logically inferred about the author's view? Now again, I here have about the author's view. So here we again, or the fact reaffirms that again we have to understand what the author's view is and restrict ourselves to understand what the author's views are, what the author's opinions are. So what can be most logically inferred about the author's view on the Supreme Court's ruling on the Sabrimala temple? What are our options? The author is unhappy and wishes the central government undo the ruling by passing a legislation. Nowhere the passage talks about this. We've already read the line wherein the author is suggesting that the politicians, the Supreme Court gave politicians an opportunity to advance much needed social reform. The concluding line of the passage is this, and this nowhere suggests that the author is unhappy with the Supreme Court's ruling. So option A is eliminated here. Option B, again the start of it says the author is unhappy. You need not waste your time. You need not go through the entire option. You can directly eliminate this option and save on that those 1 or 2 seconds there. Option C is the author is confused and does not espouse any view. Going back to the same line, when the author is giving such a strong conclusion about the Supreme Court uplifting the ban being a social reform, it is a much needed social reform, I nowhere can logically confirm it that the author is confused here. So C again is not a correct option. So we are remaining with the only option, that is D, which ought to be the correct option, though we'll still read it. The author supports the Supreme Court's ruling and sees it as a way of women emancipation, which is absolutely the correct answer, which can also be seen through the words of author which he has given in all the paragraphs. Moving ahead, now in all the above 2 questions, we've seen that how important it is sticking to what author is trying to tell us. It is how important it is, or how essential it is to understand the views of authors, to understand the opinions of authors, and restricting ourselves to that particular point and not going beyond that particular thing. Moving ahead, question number 18 talks about after Supreme Court ruling. Now here we do not have to look forward for author's views or author's opinion. What we are given here with, we are given again here with a set of facts. Now we need to understand what the facts are and understand the particular question. After the Supreme Court's ruling, Aarti, a young female child of 5 years, is going to Sabrimala temple along with her mother, who is 35 years old. Will they be allowed to go inside? Now it's a very direct question. We know what the Supreme Court ruling was. Supreme Court ruling was to uplift that particular, or lift up that particular ban. Now there is a difference to uplift the ban and lift up the ban. So let's not get confused there. So Supreme Court ruling lifted up the ban. It allowed the women of menstruating age for entering the temples. So here the question asked is, there's a small child of 5 years. She is 5 years old and she is going to enter. She wants to enter the Sabrimala temple along with her mother, who happens to be of 35 years old. Now, post Sabrimala temple, we all already know that women can enter. Will they be allowed to go inside? You can quickly just go and search for the option which starts with yes. You can again save some time here, as option A says no, which is absolutely an incorrect option, because there is no question of they not being allowed. So let's just not waste our time here. B says yes, both cannot be legally stopped from entering the temple. Do I have any other option which starts with yes or maybe? Let me have a look at it. C, only Aarti will be allowed. Let's just not waste time here. Let's not go through that particular path. D says yes, as Aarti is too young to go alone and hence need an additional accompanying person. Sounds nice. It gives a very soothing effect, but it's not a correct option, because we have to stick to what is been spoken, what has been talked, what has been discussed in the passage. It nowhere talks about a child wishing or wanting someone to accompany her or to be there for her. So the correct option according to the passage, according to what the author wants me to understand, would be option B, and the correct option for question number 18 has to be B. Okay, moving ahead to question number 19. Okay, what does it say? Subsequent to Supreme Court ruling. Again, it talks about the Supreme Court ruling and post Supreme Court ruling. Subsequent to the Supreme Court ruling on Sabrimala temple, suppose, now you have to imagine, you have to be in that particular situation and imagine what should be the answer, but sticking to what the information is given to you through the passage. So subsequent to the Supreme Court ruling on Sabrimala temple, suppose the Indian Parliament makes a law which allows women of all ages to go to the Sabrimala temple, what legal consequence would such a law have? I don't think we need to even read the options, because we all know that we have three different organs, and three different organs have their own particular functions. Once when the judiciary has passed something, there is no requirement of any other organ to again decide on that particular thing. But still we'll go through those options and we'll try and see what type of options, what type of answers would we be required to go through. Your first option says, in practice there would be no difference as the Supreme Court has already allowed women entry to the temple. Now ideally this has to be the correct answer, this should be the correct answer, but let's not rush into it, let's not hurry for answering particular option, because we never know what the author has in his mind. Maybe he has twisted, maybe he has something new for us. So let's just quickly go through the remaining options. B says the law would provide additional protection to women of menstruating age to enter Sabrimala temple. Now, I don't think it's a battlefield that the women needs any additional protection. So here again it sounds good, but there is no requirement of this to be the correct answer. C says the law is unconstitutional as Parliament is not empowered to make laws on matters which have been settled by Supreme Court. This is nowhere mentioned, this is nowhere related, and this is nowhere true also. So let's just not even talk about this particular option. D is the law will impine upon the judiciary's powers under the Constitution. No, it wouldn't. Now what do you mean by impine? It means to prevail upon the judiciary's decision, to preside about upon the judiciary's decision, but even if it does, it would have the same effect. But the passage nowhere talks about judiciary's powers under the Constitution. So the correct option here is A, and the correct option for question number 19 would be A. Moving ahead, question number 20. Now question number 20, it says Shalini is an NRI. She is living in Nepal. Now this is again another factual question wherein definitely some set of facts are given to you, but you need to stick to the information which is given to you through the passage and accordingly answer the question. So it says Shalini is an NRI, she is living in Nepal. There is a temple in Nepal where women of menstruating age are not allowed. Can she visit the temple following the Indian Supreme Court ruling? Now, just to digress a little bit, I did tell you that CLAT has entirely different pattern for its legal section, and all the other examination would definitely have altogether a different pattern. But here, for the remaining examination, when we did the legal knowledge part, we did the jurisdiction part there, wherein I told you that all the courts would be differentiated on the basis of jurisdiction. And when I was talking about Supreme Court is the apex court of this country, and accordingly this country is the territory where it would preside upon, where it would rule upon, wherein having a little pre-hand knowledge is of no loss. As soon as you see something like this, the first thing that should pop up or that may pop up in your mind is definitely not, because Nepal is out of the territory of this particular region, of this particular country, and similarly Supreme Court would definitely not have the territorial jurisdiction. So here it is not advised, it is not suggestive to apply a pre-hand knowledge, but again it's of no loss. Also, the passage nowhere talks about the Supreme Court's ruling being applied to any other countries out of the border of India. So here I have to again quickly choose the option which starts with no. So here I have two options, which starts with no, two with yes. Let's see which is more appropriate according to the passage. Option A says no, as she is of menstruating age. That's not the question, so we are not supposed to answer this. B says no, as Supreme Court's ruling applies only in Indian territory. That's it. That should be my answer. Remaining option, because they start with yes, should not even be looked upon, should not be wasted. Your time should not be wasted, as we also have time constraint in CLAT 2. Remaining are three passages. As this is your intro lecture, we would be dealing with passage 1. The remaining three passages are your homework. And when I say it's a homework, it is to be done at home, so that you have doubts, so that those doubts should be resolved and you have a refined hand on how to solve these type of questions. I repeat myself, if you have any doubts while you are solving your questions of this particular sheet, you can write it to us on your groups, you can write it to us, or you can mail it to us, and we will definitely be replying it to you. This is it for today. Thank you.